So I'm Les Brandt from near Eureka Springs, that's in Arkansas. And this morning I'm going to be telling you about the Sgraffito process, which simply means having a color on a piece of wood and then scratching through it to make your design. So I'm going to be using gesso. You can use any different color. The reason I'm doing it this order is that I'm going to paint onto this piece of wood and then we can set it aside so it can dry. And then I'm going to come back and actually do some turning. So after I do the turning, this will be ready to do some carving on to demonstrate. So all I have is a bottle of black gesso. You can use anything that's black, and I will explain later that what I said in the PDF file, you passed that out?
I haven't yet, but I will.
So in there I was talking about what you have to do to develop tooth so that the pencil, will draw on this piece. Yesterday at National Art, I found a pencil that's still a watercolor pencil that you can wash off afterwards, but that will write on anything. So it'll write on glass, it'll write on metal, and it will write on slick paint. That being the issue that you don't have to develop the tooth now. So all I've done now is to paint this on. I'm going to now set this aside so it'll dry, so later we can talk about that process. So I need to put my brush into a cup of water and bring my other things over here right now. That's when you put on the paint, in order to get a smooth enough surface, I sanded it down so there's some wood showing through it. So I normally would put on a couple coats or sand lighter. So I wouldn't have sanded through it that way. So I'm going to get my face shield, goggles, and a couple more tools. So I'm going to do a bit of the rough work with the face shield on, just to make sure nothing gets calamitous here. And then I'll take the face shield off while I'm doing the rest of it so I can be more communicating with you. Communicative. Does that work? All right. So I'm using a large bowl gouge. I always use the biggest tool I can just to eliminate. Is that okay, Larry? So to eliminate any vibrations and everything, so I use a large gouge. So this I will use to rough out. And this is in a traditional grind. I had cut this blank a couple days ago, and I just cut it out on my bandsaw. So I'm just riding the bevel across here to get a flat surface. I'm going to do one more cut just to clean it up. Not that it matters because most of it will be taken away anyway. So I flatten off the back side. Not that it really matters. I do that when I'm doing green wood because I don't have a big face plate here, and I typically just go from the chainsaw to the lathe. So while it's in the tailstock, I will flatten out the back just so I don't have as much chance of, just to get rid of any vibration. And it's not a critical process. I just want to clean it off, just so it's flat so it doesn't vibrate. So now I'm going to go back to the front. So what I'm going to do here, this is the front of the platter. Could you bring one of those pieces over? Anyone that has some, oh, the one that's in the process, the one on the right. Yes, sir. Vanna, sorry. So this is what we're going for. There are a couple pictures over here on the table of one that's completed on which I actually did birds. Unfortunately, I left that in my little kiln at home drying. It's my dry area. It's called it a kiln, but it's actually a refrigerator that burned out. Somebody gave it to me. I put a light bulb in it on a rheostat so I can control the temperature. So it's a clean space in my shop. So this is what we're going to be doing. So right now the face plate is on the top and I'm turning the bottom. This is dry maple, so I can take it all the way down to finished. Then I'm going to turn a recess in it to remount, to reverse mount into a chuck when I get to that stage. So right now I want this part to look like this. I'm not going to go all the way just because of time. So that's what we're going for.
How thick would you leave that if it was green?
If it was green, I wouldn't do this. I only turn green wood, but obviously that's not true. I almost always, all of my work is done in green wood, so when I start a new piece, I grab my chainsaw, go out and decide which log is calling to me that morning, saw a chunk off, go in and start, and I finish it. Some people think it cracks, some people think it warps, some people don't like green wood. I don't like working dry wood. I would much sooner have sap flying on me than to have dust everywhere. And I just like the way the wet wood cuts. So this wood was dry. We say stable, but we were talking earlier. There's a stage where I take this down to and then I let it set overnight so that the stress in the wood comes out, so the little groove around that platter will be straight, so there's no warping in the wood. So I'll turn it down to a spot, I'll come back tomorrow, turn it down to 3/16 or so, and then I paint it and carve the grooves in. So right now we're just going to go for the bottom. And if there are any questions, feel free. If there aren't any dumb questions or just demonstrators who don't explain very well. So I'm working on the bottom. So there's one of the guys in the club who would now stand up and go, so Les was doing that to show you to always be focused, get past the first part, and know where you are at all times. I think most of the things like that happen because you just lose track for an instant, as I did there. So all I'm doing now would be to get down to start thinking about my rim. And the rim is simply your canvas on which you're going to be decorating. This piece is roughly 11 inches or something, I think. And in that size, 2.5 to 3 inch rim works pretty well. This wood was way thicker than it would have had to be, depending upon what size bowl I want to turn out of it, or what size bowl, what depth of bowl I want. So I'm just trying to get rid of wood here. Now I'm shaping the bottom of the bowl. I'm going to flatten that off a bit. That's where my recess will be. So now I'm getting down a bit so I can start being more critical. So I'm going to take this down, and I can finish the bottom. The wood is dry, relatively stable. So even after I finish it, the wood can move, but the bottom will be good. And this is maple I'm using here. This is hard maple. A couple of pieces that were over there on the table were soft maple. For doing the Sgraffito, where you're going to be carving through it, you need a very fine grained wood. You don't want to use pine or ash for carving, no matter what you're doing. So I'm developing the shape of the bowl here on the bottom. The rim on this size piece is about 2.5 to 3 inches. It just depends on how much space you want to decorate. So you want the rim, because of the decoration. I have a piece over there, a piece I did a few months ago, and I coved it in too far, which makes it very difficult to do the carving later. So you want the rim to be pretty flat or flat. So here I'll go a little bit further, then I'll finish the bowl, turn in the recess, and I'll be ready to go. This wood had a line in it. Excuse me. I didn't think it would go all the way through, so I don't know if this is going to work or not. That crack. For this process, you want a pretty clean piece of wood that you're going to be doing the carving on. So I'm flattening the bottom. So that's all ready to go for the recess. I want to get this pretty far before removing the tailstock. I just like that stability. I haven't done it in a while, but sometimes I have a catch, so I'd sooner have a tailstock there. I think part of the catchiness is because of this. Yeah, I have a whole bark inclusion here, so that's going to be an issue, but we can still show on it. So now I have it, I have it down close. I'll take the tailstock away. Now I'll work on that recess. And the recess for the chuck, take out the elbow denter here. The recess for the chuck wants to be sized, or needs to be sized for your chuck. I can take the piece and remount and still have it be clean enough to show, as long as I have the circle for your chuck jaws to be optimal. So you don't want big gaps between the chuck jaws. You want them to be closed down, so all of the chuck jaw is contacting the wood. So you want to make that to fit your jaws. And I have this set up for roughly that. So here are my jaws set up. So actually I had them set for something else. So I'm going to expand into this recess. And that's where I want it to be. I want it to be very close to the jaws closed down, so that they're contacting all the way around. So I'm going to touch this in here, find out where I am. So that'll be my opening. And now I just want to get rid of some of that wood first. Might go about 3/16. You just want to make sure you have enough depth so you hold on with the jaws. Now I'm going to get my square scraper. Actually, I didn't bring that square scraper. But any chisel will work, any skew. I'm going into, these are stronghold jaws I'm using. So I don't have a dovetail. So I need my recess, my wall to be straight. Need to come up a little bit to make a clean cut here. So there's my recess though, that the jaws will fit into. And that needs to be flat, that the jaws fit against. So now I'm just going to touch in and make a couple of lines, kind of a half bead. And just roll the skew around. I had a little bitty catch there, so I'm going to roll it around this way. So I'll do that with each of those grooves. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time to make this perfect. I'm not good enough at it to do it fast enough to keep you from falling asleep. And another thing with this, obviously, is you have to consider the depth here when you go to turn your bowl after a while. On the recess, it's not a tenon sticking out the bottom. you need to remember that you're inside. Pardon me? 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Okay, thank you. So we're going to break this down, 15 minutes to do the bottom side, 15 minutes to do the top side, and then we'll switch to the more fun part. So I have 3 minutes to pretend the bottom is finished. And during the recess, it really doesn't matter. I can come back to it. There will be the relieving of the stress, so there will be some warping, but I can remount. I'm going to make that a little bit deeper. Using a badan or whatever, and there's always controversy in our club which way a badan is used. And I'm totally not where I'm supposed to be when I'm working. I haven't settled down here yet, so I keep having these little bumps. So I would go all the way around here and clean all of that up, make it all a perfect shape. I would also sand it down. I sand normally on this probably 320 to 400. So that would be all finished. So I still have some issues in here. It's not turned down all the way there, but we're going to call that done for now. So now I need to get this off. So the other really critical thing is where you put the screws. You don't want the screws in the rim. Like the first one, the bowl I did got a little bit larger inside than I had intended because I mounted on a faceplate and I put screws around the outside because of stability and everything. I don't want it moving. So you want to think about where the screws are. On the screws, you don't use drywall screws. I like Spax, S-P-A-X. You can pick them up at Lowe's. They have real sharp, deep threads. They're just a high quality screw, and they work extremely well. So at this point, these are number 12s. I use 10 or 12 depending upon the wood. These are 1 1/4. So it gives me plenty of holding power. And at home, since I already had that finished, probably even sprayed with lacquer, I certainly wouldn't be doing it like this because I just ruined it. Switching to this piece now, I did this piece at a demo last weekend for my club, and I didn't take the time to sand it down, just as here, but I turned the recess in it so it could be mounted in my chuck. So I had already taken it off of the faceplate. So in order to finish, to get the back to where I wanted it to be, I mounted it in a chuck. I reverse mounted into this recess. Then I turned a new recess on the front, so then I could remount it and now finish down the back entirely. Was that confusing? Did you get that? So I didn't get this sanded down the first time. I turned a new recess on the top, and then I can mount that and then finish this down. Okay? And then I go back the other way again, and then go ahead and work on the top. So that's what we're going to do on this piece. I'm just going to do this one. Now I'm going to do this one. This one is not what I said to do because it's really too large. So I want to use the smaller. It's a little bit smaller. So I'm reverse mounting into the recess. One of the other things, if you mount into a recess, is to make sure you have plenty of room around the outside of the recess. The reason I just thought of that is because this crack that runs through here is not a good piece to be mounting on a recess. So had I been thinking better, I would have done a tenon on here and just taken that off later. So you have to have enough space around there to handle the strength of expanding into it. So now I have this piece up here. Now I want to flatten off this front. So we're saying the back is finished. So at this point, I would turn down the rim. While you're turning down the rim on the top, you need to remember where the bowl is on the bottom. They have to match, obviously. So I just want to get a bunch of this wood off now. Yes, I know I don't always go the correct direction. I just remembered the crack. Cracks and face shields go much better together. So when I'm going to be turning down the rim and I want the rim to be flat, I leave some of the mass in the middle where the bowl will be eventually. To help stabilize the rim. So I would leave all of that wood. What I found is that a caliper works well. I bump that in against the bottom. So I'm fairly close. Right there is the edge of my bowl. If you can see right where the caliper is, that's the edge of the bowl. So now I want to get a little bit cleaned up here. hear the chattering from the crack. So this might be a design opportunity. So this is the point now where, since I relieved all the stresses, I've taken a lot of this wood off, whether the wood's dry and stable or not, it's still going to move. So at this point, maybe I'd take it down a little bit further, and then I would let it set overnight to warp and twist. So tomorrow morning, I come back, I finish it down, then I paint it, and then I carve the 2 grooves. Could Vanna bring me that bowl? The one I gave back to you, I should have just kept it up here. Thank you. Those 2 grooves, the one around the outside and the one around the inside, are just extremely critical because they're very fine lines. So if your wood moves at all, you're not going to have an even groove all the way around. This bowl, I turned it, I flattened it, I sanded it, I picked up whatever I picked up to do the grooves, and it had already moved. So I had to come back and make the grooves deeper in order it had warped enough so on one side the groove was twice as deep as on the other side. So that's why I decided now to let it set overnight, come back, finish it down, and then turn the grooves in it. So what time are we, Michael? I'm sorry?
30 minutes. 30.
Now? Okay, so this part is finished. After. So this is the piece I painted a while ago. This would, I might take it down a little bit further, a little bit thinner wall, and then paint it. And so now what I'm going to do is to buff this down very lightly, just to sand it a little bit. Then I'm going to put another coat of gesso on it. When we come back from break, then we'll turn the grooves in it. In between the gesso, 220, just 220, right, 220, 320. So I sand the whole thing down to 220 or 320, then I paint it, then I'll let that dry, and then I come back and sand it down a little bit. And just to get anything you might have gotten into it. Because I'm so good at it, I really don't get any bubbles or anything in it, but you can tell by my turning. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to sand this so you all understand how we got to with this. The center is still there to give me stability so this doesn't start vibrating and everything on me. So I'll turn in the grooves, then I'll take the center of the bowl out, and then we'll start carving. Okay? So right now, I'm going to sand, and I'll put in another coat. So I'm just going to put a bit more gesso onto this piece that we did a while ago. And it's not critical at all. And because, and you can see the line, you can't really see them. I see where I hadn't finished this piece down entirely. So there's still more of a pressure line from the heel of the gouge, I think, is what it really amounts to.
Would you have seen that if you pre-sanded it?
No, yeah, exactly. I didn't finish this piece, so it's not sanded down. there wouldn't be any lines showing if I was actually doing it. First time I did this, I used a different brush that wasn't as fine, so I got real bad brush strokes. So this is just it's not a super high quality brush, but it's very fine. It's a synthetic fiber and it's very fine. So when that dries down, when we come back from break, and I dry this, I use a hair dryer on it. So when we come back from break, I would sand it down a little bit, and then I'll tell you the magic pencils that I found that will write on it. The Stabilo pencil that will write on that. So a couple of things. So we let the wood set overnight. Then we painted it, one coat. Then we came back, painted it again, sanded it, painted it again. So we're going to say this is ready. So when Larry... It's called a Stabilo Aquarellable, and that'll be on the list that Larry will send you. It writes on anything. You probably can't see that on the camera, but it writes on this plastic bag, it writes on the table, it writes on metal. So the two paragraphs that are on here about how to develop tooth and what you need to go buy and what kind of pencil you should go buy, just disregard all that, and Larry will put up this Stabilo. So Stabilo pencil saves all that trouble, so you just write with that. Now, Vanna, I need the white birds that are laying over there. Are they laying over there?
Yep.
And I need a plastic triangle, which is right here. So now we're going to talk about laying out. So there's a photograph. May I have the photograph with a piece with the birds on it, please? So when I do the birds, I cut out these paper birds and I lay those out in a design. So this is what I was going for with that piece. So the birds are just paper cutouts, little sticky stuff on the back, and I lay out the piece with the birds, whatever design I want, with them flying around the rim. I just broke his head off. There you go, he's back. So I would lay out the birds like that, put them wherever I want them, however I want it to be, and then I would use my pencil, the new Stabilo, and I would simply draw around the bird. Is that showing up?
No, it's yellow.
Oh, yeah, well, too bad. Let's try the white one again. Well, you really don't see it around the edge until I take it off, so let me just do it real quickly. I'm not going to try to do it accurately. So I'll
You have
do
like stencils for those triangle ones you did too? Or?
Yes. I'll show you that on the actual piece though.
Okay, cool.
And at home I have a blade I stick under here. So can you kind of see the white bird?
Oh yeah.
Okay, all right. So that's how I would do the bird design and I'll show more on that. So on this piece, I did some carving. I left some bare wood and I put in some lines. And those lines you probably can't see because they're in the yellow. So now I'm going to do my glasses for close-up. So the wonderful thing that the ophthalmologist said is, how do you want lenses to show up after we do the cataract surgery. So I went with one near and one far. But the near is set for my distance working on the lathe, if that gives you any clue as to how important working at the lathe is to me. So you can see that line?
Yes.
Okay. So all I do is run around the piece. So I have one near and one far lens, but the near lens is for 20 inches or so. So right now, I can see what I'm doing, it's just not real crisp. Right? So there's a set. So then I turn it around. And you just play with it. It's not a real critical thing. I don't know if anyone saw the spiral carved piece that I have out on the table in the hall. People think that's perfect. And how did you get the lines so perfect? Well, they aren't perfect. Your brain just fills it in. They're really quite far off. And these lines, so you can see that now. So they don't have to be exact. And the whole point of these Stabilo pencils is that they're water soluble. So any part of those lines that I miss, I can simply come back with a damp cloth afterwards and wipe them off. Rather than if I used a pencil or something, you wouldn't be able to get it off. So there's the line for that. We'll go back to the bird for a moment. So these are flex cut. I don't know how familiar you are with flex cut, but they come very sharp. And they don't say anything in the thing about it, but they come with a box of Band-Aids. Is that a no-brainer or what? It's no, don't be careful. You can hurt yourself, you could cut, no, here's some Band-Aids. So flex cut are just these incredibly sharp, they come in all different shapes and sizes of gouges. If you're going to do anything with it, I really recommend the flex strop, I think it's called. They're just like razor blades, so they're extremely critical. If you touch them to any kind of stone, they're done. So you can download the instructions on sharpening them. If they're not sharp, they're not fun to use, they'll tear, at least in cross grain. So you want them to be sharp. So I use a reciprocating carver. You can use a handle. The same blades fit into a handle. Is that working out that way? You can put them into the handle, and it works. I tried it. I used it for about 1/2 inch, and then I went back to my reciprocating carver because I have it. So it just, with the handle you have to put pressure. So if anything goes wrong, you can slip. With this, you don't put pressure. I mean, you do, but you don't really, not very much. I also have an automock from when I was carving before. This is just a super duper Proxon that costs twice as much and does exactly the same thing. I think maybe it's built better, I don't know. It's back when I just had all kinds of money to buy anything I wanted. And the Proxon is wonderful. The Proxon's like 160 or something. And when I push that switch, that's supposed to work. Plug it in first. I had my hair dryer in to dry the paint. So I'll touch up here on the bird a little bit. You want to find the grain. You want to be very comfortable. It takes a long time. When I'm doing it at home, I have pads to help absorb, not absorb to make it easier to hold it. And again, I have lines there, but it's not that super critical. If you look at a bird flying over, it's always changing. So I go from the middle and go toward the end. And there's the beak. These are called black skimmers. It's a bird down in the Everglades that I love. They fly in a flock. I don't know what a flock of skimmers is called, but they fly with their lower mandible down in the water, and when they touch something in the water, then it flips up. So they're called black skimmers. That, you can see I didn't get quite deep enough. Vanna, do you see a pair of glasses laying over there on that table? If you all knew what I was seeing while I'm doing that, you would be really impressed. So I'm going to do one more wing here. Vision is such a cool thing. I was turning a very deep bowl about 6 months ago, and I was all the way into the bottom, and to look down into it, I took my face shield off. Still had my goggles on, and I extended my, I don't know if any of you have ever heard it, in Arkansas, woodturners say one more cut. So I had a big scraper a little bit too far over the rest, maybe not quite at the right height, and I had a catch while I was looking down in there. 10 minutes later I was in the house and I looked in the mirror to find a very large blood blister on the side of my eyeball. And over the next couple of days it slowly moved across my eye to the point where my wife wouldn't let me go out in public. A couple days later I found the goggles, and I couldn't figure out the smudge that was in the middle of my goggles, and it turned out it was a dent from the handle of the gouge that hit right in the middle. So I have goosebumps. It was very frightening till I found out I was okay. So that's all the carving. So I'll do a couple of these V's now. And I really recommend some form of padding. I mean, I'm very unstable doing it this way, but that's something I forgot to bring along. So you can see those lines developing. When it makes that much noise, you know you're carving pretty deeply. I don't normally like to start out at the groove. It just makes it more difficult. I usually start somewhere along the line. I do try to make those ends line up. It just looks pretty cool. This one, if you can see, I bumped over, so I can take like a fine felt tip or something if that little bitty groove shows up there. And this is where I said, like the hard maple carves very well. Soft maple did also, it did fine, but you have to have wood that, you know, either doesn't have any grain or is very, very close together, and you need the blades to be extremely sharp. I was playing around with a piece of pine the other day, and you don't want to point at your other hand like I just did. But the wonderful thing about the reciprocating carver is you put so little pressure on it that you don't have that much of a chance of slipping.
Do you use a carving glove?
I don't for this. I just usually don't point the question was if I use a carving glove. I just don't point it at my hand normally. So no, that would be a good idea though, yeah. Let me look at my list and see if there's anything else I was supposed to mention. It says keep the gouges sharp. I already discussed that. Oh, so this is, you can get all different shapes. You can go on Flex Cut and look that up. This is a 70-degree 1/4 inch blade gouge, and they have a 45 also, but it's very tight. It's much more critical for using. The acetate, the triangles, is just, am I too loud on something? Why am I sputtering?
You're fine.
Yeah? Okay. The acetate triangles, those are at 40 degrees. I think that I have that on the list that Larry's going to send out. The Stabilo aquarellable pencils is the critical part. This is set up, this is from Flex Stop. This is their sharpening system, if you will. These blades, like I said, are extremely sharp when you get them. And I was always afraid to touch them because they're so critical. But with this thing, they have different shapes on here for depending upon the shape of the blade you're using. So you pull it toward you. This is a rouge that, you know, a little bit of abrasive for sharpening the tools. So you just, and it works pretty well. I sharpened them all before I came up. So even by hand, anybody who's done carving, oh, you should talk to the guys out front. Didn't think about that. There are people out front doing carving that would know a lot more about this than I do. I bought the whole set a couple of years ago, and this is the only blade I use out of it. So I don't recommend buying the set because it's like, I think it's like $160 now. These little blades are 13, 14. I think this was 14 for this system. So you do the inside on this, you flip it over, and you do the outside, and you really want to watch your bevel. You want to have the whole bevel riding on. It needs to be highly polished. The instructions say once you've done it long enough, then it starts getting rounded over no matter how careful you are. So then you have to take it to a wheel. And I don't think they mean like an 80 grip wheel. You all agree on that? Huh? I think it's probably just a little buffing wheel, or like the Tormek, to do that on the leather side maybe. I mean, it's so thin. They're wonderful. They're just super tools to me.
Is that a gouge or a V?
This is a V. Can you see it like that? No. Is there any place this will show?
Hold it against the paper there, Les. There you go.
It's one of those.
You're on now. You're zoomed in now.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, it's a V groove, and that's what I said. There was a 70 and a 40, but the 40 is like that. So it's extremely critical. You go real deep, it's just real fast. So you don't want the 40. Get the 70, and the 1/4 inch just works out real well on that part of it. One other thing, I didn't do all the safety precautions, but you need to protect yourself. I have really damaged my hearing already, and you can't wear earmuffs and a space shield. Marianne was watching This Old House, and he was talking about these disposable earplugs. And if you haven't tried these things, they're just phenomenal. I put one in one ear the other day and the radio went off, which kind of indicates what the other ear is worth. But they're fantastic. He was comparing them on whatever their little rating system, and you just twist it down and put it in your ear, and it just blocks out almost everything. You want to wash your hands before you do that. He said you can clean them with alcohol also.
I find mine that are on a string, and then I keep them around so other people know that they make them with a string.
So some of these are made with a string. The ones I had with a string weren't the soft, cushy kind.
They make them with, there's 3 or 4 companies that make them.
So they do make them with a string then, yes. So that's a very good idea to have them on a string, so on the neck, because otherwise you lose them. And the other thing that I like to use that's to keep your pencils sharp and to go the fine line, this is a Ellipse pencil sharpener, very inexpensive, and it's extremely high quality, so you get a super point very quickly.
Les, what type of finish do you put on that when you have gesso on there?
So the question was the finish after this gesso. I do lacquer. I have the shellac and denatured alcohol, which I forgot to mention that. Before I paint on the gesso, during break earlier, I sprayed on shellac and denatured alcohol. So it's simply a sanding sealer, but I cut the shellac with the denatured alcohol, so it's not that much shellac, so when you go to sand it, you're not clogging up your paper. So I use that. I started off using it with super glue. If I inlay turquoise or something, I spray this on so the super glue doesn't stain into the wood. And I use it on here simply as a sealer, a sanding sealer.
Is that a 50-50 mix?
The mix on the shellac and denatured alcohol, somebody gave me a formula, but I'm not very good at formulas. But I just heard the other day, the cut is spray it on, and if you touch your finger to it and it's sticky, it's good. If it's really sticky, it's too much. If it's not sticky, you need to add more shellac. That's pretty sophisticated. One of the engineers in our club, when he talks about laying things out, I do this spiral carve piece. And he said, well, how'd you do that? And I said, well, I draw a line and then I take a piece of paper and lay it around the curve of the piece, and that gives me a spiral. And then he said, well, I would have used my indexing wheel and I would have done this and I would have done this and I would have done this. And he said, yours is much better because mine would have been boring and very mechanical. But just like on here, they look perfect, but they can be quite a bit off and still appear perfect. And who said it has to be perfect anyway? So.
When you're done carving, do you do anything to seal it?
After I'm finished carving, now what I'm going to do, again, back to the tooth and the wonderful new Stabilo pencils. Before, I would just put on the gesso and you couldn't do anything or you lose the tooth. Now, so then your wood is also unprotected. So you have to be careful to have clean hands so you don't mess up your raw wood. Now I can put on the gesso, spray it with lacquer or whatever I want to spray it with so everything is protected, and then draw the lines, or draw the lines and spray on the lacquer. I'm not sure if that would work, but I know I could just go ahead and finish it, then draw on the lines so my wood is protected and the new pencils don't need the tooth, so that would all work.
But when you're finished carving, what do you finish it with then before you sell it? Your last step.
After I'm totally finished, I would spray it with lacquer. That's what I use. I just bought a high volume, low pressure thing. And after I bought it, I found out I could only use water-based materials. And so I bought some water-based material. I don't even know what it is. It's some kind of wonderful finish, and I don't know enough about it yet. I don't even know what the chemical thing is. But I started using that. And the cool thing about it is that when I buff it, I melt it. And it can take an orange peel look and turn perfectly smooth, but I can't give you any other information on it right now because I don't know. Finishes to me, I don't know, I'm real mixed. I'm always experimenting. Food grade, I just use walnut oil. Other pieces I use quite a bit of lacquer. I've tried all different things. I was staying with a very kind gentleman last night who was talking about wet sanding with pumice, and I've never even wet sanded. I don't typically, on my finishes, I guess I don't typically go for super high gloss. I don't know. I would sooner have the art be more important than a perfect finish, although sometimes I do sand up to 1200, so very mixed story.
When do you do your bowl part, carve out the center? Before or after black?
So after I painted it black, then I go back. That's the part I forgot to do before we moved the lathe. Can we get the lathe back in? So at this point right here, I painted black, let it dry, then I turn those grooves, as on this piece, the groove around the outside here, and then around the inside, delineating the carved area. So I would just take a gouge and make that groove all the way around, then do the inside groove, and then turn out the bowl. I leave that to the last to give stability to the rim. And you don't want to go too narrow on the rim. This is pretty good, the one here, and it's probably 3/16 maybe, something like that. You don't want to go too thin. It's not going to make the product any better, and it just gets more unstable for carving and turning the grooves in it. This I would turn down thinner. I will still turn this down thinner. I can reverse mount into the chuck. This is why you want to put things to protect the wood. There you go. So this piece, while I still had it on the face plate, I sprayed on a couple of coats of lacquer on this. So the bottom, if I'm actually doing it at home, once I get the bottom turned down, recess turned in, then I finish the bottom. So it is done. So then I reverse mount, then I spray black, I carve down the rim, spray black, turn in the two gouges, then turn out the bowl. Now I would now spray it with a coat of lacquer to protect everything, and then come back and draw my lines and start doing the carving. Yeah? Are we good? And so this is the final product, not finished, but all I need to do is carve the rest of the lines in then. And then that's what we did. Thank you all very much.